Welcome back to Mental Health Matters. We've got a jam-packed show today that should be really interesting for everybody. It's on the Super Bowl Sunday. Perfect timing to give a show about the other side of football. Ooh. Namely, not just the hype and the excitement and the cultural phenomenon of football, but also the other side related to mental health. Because there's been so much in the news regarding mental health and football. And you are listening to Mental Health Matters with Dr. Scott Terry. And today's show, by the way, we've got 4 guests on today to talk about football and CTE and what it means, and really the bigger point about getting to what is the decision that we should make as fans, as parents, as people who support this event to occur in our society. I don't know if that's a good way to start. Anyways, I'm Dr. Scott Terry. I am a family therapist here in Iowa, Fairfield, Iowa, but I also have branches. I run the Art and Counseling Center in Chicago and in Iowa. And if you want to see some of these, you could look on the Art and Counseling Center YouTube channel for some of the archives of some of these shows, as well as some lectures that we've done on suicide and depression and some other topics. If you have any questions, you could email me, scott@ardentcenter.com, and feel free to come on board and tell us what you'd like to talk about. So let's go around the room today. Elizabeth, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth Adler. I am a music teacher, and I'm an intern for Scott.
Okay, great. And the topic of today is CTE. How do you pronounce that?
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
And what does that mean?
Well, that is for all of us to define.
Okay.
It's a form of traumatic brain injury.
Exactly. All right, Kyle?
Hi, my name's Kyle Fernandez, and I like to play music, and I work in Fairfield, Iowa.
And you're an intern as well?
And I'm an intern as well.
All right. And Danielle, you're on the phone.
Yep, my name is Danielle McWilliams. I am a graduate intern. I'm just finishing up my master's, and I will be a therapist here soon. Okay,
great. And Ryan, you are with us as well.
Yes, I'm Danielle's better half. I currently work at a school, and I'm here to talk about football. I've played football for 9 years and have coached it for 5 years as well, so I have some background in that category.
Fantastic. What do you do at the school, Ryan?
My official title is Juvenile School Court Liaison, but I do a lot of different things. I kind of similar role of dean of students or kind of assistant principal. Whatever they ask me to do, I get to do it.
Great. So you also have one foot in the educational world, another sort of half step in the therapeutic world, and you also have a background in football, both personally and we could say almost professionally, as somebody who's played quite a bit, but also somebody who coaches. Is that a way to say that?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate.
All right. So don't feel like we're beating up on you today, because this is really about trying to find ways that work for everything. So, Ryan, why don't you start today and say what you think, know a little bit about this issue as well as a real strong fan's perspective. What would you say about this area?
Well, I don't believe this information was out back when I had played, but after reading up on it and learning about CTE and what it can do to your mental state with the depression, the loss of memory, and the mood swings that can possibly occur, I would say that I would really, really strongly think about playing football if I knew that going in back when I started when I was 12 years old. That is a big concern for me as well. I have a son that's 1.5, and thinking about whether or not to have him play has been weighing on my mind quite a bit as these articles have come out, and I've read through some of them and dissected them and watched different videos of them on ESPN and those kind of things, where they're really kind of attacking the NFL. And we're trying to cover it up for the last 10 years.
So tell us about this cover-up the last 10 years. What have you heard? What is? I mean, we've the movie Concussions, by the way, have been out with Will Smith. Really powerful movie, and I highly recommend it to everybody. And to me, it seemed so obvious. But I'm biased because everything I do is about protecting the brain. And if your brain doesn't work, nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. If you can't think clearly and at the highest level that you can, what else matters? What else can be more important than that of any organ, of anything we do?
Your brain is the interface between your consciousness, your mind, and the world outside. And if that's damaged, then you can't express yourself as well.
Or at all. So, Ryan, what have you heard from your perspective? And again, you're somebody who's really into the sport.
What I've read and what I've heard has been about how the NFL tried to cover it up. They've had their own testing done. Boston, I think it's Boston College, I believe, is the one who does most of the testing for CTE, and they are the ones that are kind of taking the forefront on trying to bring this to light. And the NFL has tried covering this up. They've hired their own private doctors, or however you want to say it, to try to give information and prove the point that there aren't that many people that have had the brain CTE arrive after playing football for several years, and trying to prove to the public that it's safe and encourage people to continue to go out, even though there's been reports, I think even I've heard back from the early 90s or even late 80s, that said this was a very dangerous sport to play and that the amount of damage done to your brain was irreversible.
And it is irreversible, except there is a lot of work been done by one of my people that I love quite a bit, Daniel Amen, and there is ways to heal the brain. It's called neuroplasticity, and the brain actually can be modified and healed and developed. It used to be the theory that you were as intelligent as you were, as intelligent as you're going to be. And we stopped developing early 20s, and that's it. And actually one of the dangers of playing football at a young age is that the brain is so developing and so sensitive to injury that those injuries sustain themselves. But the good news is that some of this damage is reversible with proper nutrition and supplements and exercise and meditation and diet and sleep and all the things I preach to every client and everybody who walks in, that we all in an invisible wheelchair. And the question is, what are we going to do with our limitations? We all have limitations, but that doesn't mean we stop there. It means we grow from that point. That's the point we start and move forward in. But my question to everybody, and I need to step back here, is from a fan's perspective. I mean, today is Super Bowl Sunday, and I almost feel like this is sacrilegious. Should we be talking about this? How, as a fan, do you take in this information? Can you still watch the sport in the same way? Do you still have the same passion? What do you want to create with, this? So, Ryan, as a fan, I'm sorry to start with you, but I'm just fascinated. How, somebody who's educated on both ends.
I guess watching it, I'm not the one who's getting injured, and they're making lots of money in the NFL to play is what the NFL has really been trying to sell as well. It's their choice. They're getting paid for it. And with the lawsuit that's going on, they're paying back all those people that have had the damage. But the concern is of the kids that before they get to the NFL in high school, Pop Warner, those leagues, as well as college, that you're not getting paid for that. So what about those people and what this breeds? So I would think that watching it is also promoting the negative behavior and potentially leading to damage of other kids. And I haven't really thought about it that way before, I guess, Scott. But I do enjoy it. It's something that I've grown up with, and I really enjoy sports quite a bit. So I guess that's something I really hadn't thought about on a deeper level, other than it's probably wrong and I shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, Brian. I mean, I grew up watching Ryan. Yeah, Ryan. I grew up watching football and watching the Patriots and the Giants on the East Coast. And, football's fun. Like, football is a fun sport, and there's a lot of good things that come out of it. Building teamwork. There's a lot of people that come from sort of low economic standards and such, and having a good sport and team and community is really can really enhance a person's future. It can give them focus on their future.
I love that, Kyle, because that's really part of what we're talking about.
Right.
Because we miss that when we start thinking, oh my God, why are people doing this? It's not just, okay, it's a good sport. Sports themselves can be a wonderful thing, and this sport in particular promotes not only that sense of physicality and integration with the mind and body, but it also promotes teamwork and, all kinds of things of ways to grow. But on the other hand, right? So how else would you say, Kyle?
I would say, there's pros and cons to everything, and everyone needs to, make their own decision to anything. If you're going to climb a tree, you're going to have certain risks and such. If you're going to cross the street, you're going to have risks. The issue is that, with football, it's a lot of times it's not even a matter of risk. It's you're going in there, you're going to have your head bumped, you're going to have your head smashed, like, no matter what. That's the outcome. And so it's more about, are you going to send your kids out there? Do you want to be doing that? Do you want your loved ones doing that? How much are you willing to sort of give up of yourself, of your body, of your brain, of your future to make money or to do this or to do that?
So just to take a step back for a second, I realized we haven't really defined what CTE is and what the symptoms look like. So I'm just reading here from a New York Times article. They say
that was just out last week.
Yes.
So talk about timing again.
It's all. I mean, this is the time to be talking about it.
That's in politics, apparently.
And an NFL player Ken Stabler just passed away, and when his brain was examined, they discovered that he had a fairly advanced CTE.
Which is the only way that you could actually completely diagnose it. There's possibilities that PET scans might be able to pre-diagnose it, but that's even very experimental. Right now, the only way to determine that you have CTE is post-mortem.
Right.
And it should be noted, too, that it is a neurodegenerative thing, so it does get worse over time.
Yes.
And so being worse means what? So
the way that this disease manifests itself is in a fairly similar way to Alzheimer's or dementia. So that can include memory loss, confusion, impulsiveness, and depression. I'm reading directly right now from this article.
This is the New York Times.
This is a New York Times article.
Okay.
So essentially we're talking about changes in personality, changes in memory, and overall volatility of moods.
It's the frontal lobe. I mean, the whole brain is getting messed. Yeah, but the prefrontal lobes is really a suffering part, and that's the part of your brain that you have this high-low and this low-road response, and so when you have this impulse to go do something, your prefrontal cortex is what you use to stop yourself from doing that if it's, maybe a bad thing. And so when you have alcohol, that prefrontal cortex shuts down, and so that's the part of the brain that's sort of degenerating, and so you're unable to stop these sort of impulses, and you can't be as much yourself as you want to be.
But partly also, the fear of this is also aggression. And it's hard, again, getting back to a sport that's about aggression. Are they just aggressive people, essentially, as somebody who's playing? So, Ryan, when you hear that about aggression, how would you think you distinguish that of, like, what's really, somebody, what's I'm stumbling over the words.
Is if you're noticing aggression in a football player or a former football player, is that just a part of their personality that was present and actually helped them to be drawn to football in the first place, or is that something that was caused by injuries to the brain, to the head?
Yeah. What do you?
Well, I think I think it's part of the personality to begin with. Football is a very physical sport. To excel at it, you have to be very physical and very aggressive at times. You can say people have a different, are able to turn off the switch on and off the field, but I think that depends a lot on the person, and depending upon their background and other factors before they first took the field might play into that. But I think as you get programmed to that, your brain gets used to it, having that aggression on all the time. If you play for 10 or 15 years, it's going to be harder, I think, to reverse that process and make sure that you are able to shut it off at certain times so that aggression might constantly be there. And then, like you guys were talking about with the prefrontal lobe, if that is starting to slowly deteriorate, that aggression might come out more frequently and in a worse way.
Absolutely. By the way, you're listening to Mental Health Matters today, and on the Super Bowl Sunday, which is a bizarre thing to even be saying, we're talking about CTE, traumatic brain injuries, essentially, you could think of it, for people who play football. But the other thing and you're listening to Mental Health Matters and KRUU 100.1 in your FM dial, and archived on the YouTube station of Arden Counseling Center. I think that's how we say that. And if you've got any questions, feel free to email us, scott@ardencenter.com. But this we could also look at this as anybody who's having traumatic, recurrent brain trauma. So if you're let's say there's fears that, for instance, if you play soccer and you're bouncing the ball off your head over and over and over again, or if you're a hockey player. I had a mountain bike accident, which I tell clients about, where I had a traumatic brain injury. The difference is it was a one-time event. It fell off the thing, a rock went in my head, and I recovered after a year. Boom. But this is every day, and it's like a sub-concussion. So it's not necessarily that you're getting a concussion going on, passing out. It's more, one of the analogies is people say, well, you could have a harder helmet. Well, you could have a hard helmet on an egg. But if you shake that egg up like a shaken baby syndrome, it doesn't matter. That egg is going to be scrambled. And so it's not always about a concussion, so to speak. Like, for instance, with a lot of soldiers that I've dealt with, where they're having IEDs, where explosion devices, and the car's shaken, and again, you're having like a shaken baby, a shaken adult syndrome. Again, the brain is very hard with lots of sharp ridges inside. The brain itself, that's the skull, and the brain itself has the consistency of like soft butter, tofu, Jell-O, right? And so it's easily damaged. And if you shake it around and it's in liquid.
There's also sharp edges in the skull.
Yes, that's what I meant to say. Yes. Thank you, Kyle.
Just to clarify here, the brain is not hard or sharp.
Right.
It's a river, not a rock.
So making the helmet harder doesn't necessarily get rid of the problem. And so the question is, how do you stop that shaken baby? How do you take that brain, which is very soft, in liquid, or surrounded by this very hard, sharp thing, and shaking it up over and over and over again? Right now, I've got 2 clients with what we believe to be this kind of issue, and former football players, and it's a concern because when you're having personality changes, when you're having issues of transformation in a negative perspective, you could see the damage. It is so obvious. And so the question is, first, how how do we do? How, as Ryan said so wonderfully, how do we decide if we're supporting this through watching or having our children play this thing that could be a good thing but also can't be? You know, how do we get back to that decision making? But also coming back to, if all of us have had some damage of some sorts in our lives, how do we heal our brains?
Right. And so it's more about it's we're not bashing football we're talking about denial, and the fact is that people have been denial since I think the 80s at least about football and the issues with football and brain trauma. And I'm just reading from the Huffington Post. Boston University researchers have discovered that high school football linemen take 1,000 to 1,500 shots to the head during a single football season, and so it's a lot about the children. 1,500 shots to the head, and it's these sub hits. It's not, oh well, you know, I had a concussion and such, and so I'm, you know, the victim. It's these, what the research has shown. Purdue did a research, and what the research has shown is that the people who have subconcussive hits, when they're having hits to the head, shots to the head, they might not have symptoms of concussion and such, but the brain, there's still tissue damage. There's still brain tissue damage still being done, and so it's about the denial. We're sending our kids out there, and we have to say it does affect the brain. And if you know, you think you're the parent, if you think that sending your kid out there and it's not that, but just send your kid out there not in denial. Send your kid out there knowing what's going to happen. They're going to have their head bashed thousands of times, and that's going to affect their brain.
Well, especially to a developing brain. And again, the brain is still developing into the 20s. And so it's really quite essential to get that damage will occur. And the question is, again, is it worth it? What do we do? And you know, there's so many issues to talk about, from being a fan to watching, to sending your kids out, to what do we do afterwards. But the biggest issue, and I think Kyle is absolutely right, is to not be in denial.
I'm seeing a parallel here, maybe a controversial one, between this issue and cigarettes. So when cigarettes first came onto the scene, people didn't know that they were going to cause cancer. They didn't know the risks. And then over time, it became clearer and clearer that those things were true but I think that they were covered up. Cigarettes continued to be glamorized in movies and shows and ads.
Still do.
And they still are. Until at this point, you have cigarettes being sold with a giant skull on the carton to say, this is not healthy for you. You're in trouble if you're doing this. But it's still legal. It's still possible to get cigarettes, and lots of people still smoke. But I think we're talking about something that went from being a widely accepted, very kind of American, very cool, very hip and young thing, to being something that is now understood to be very, very dangerous. And I think that football needs a similar treatment. I think it needs to be very clear that these risks are not minor.
Right, and you know, it's you know, if you play baseball, there's risks. If you play any sport, there's risks, and there's always, you know, we want to see how much we can push the human body. That's part of sort of the competitive spirit, and it's you know, natural selection. Who's the strongest? Who can withstand all that and still come out on top? But
I think there's a difference between just doing, you know, as I saw in there's a great Frontline report on this, by the way, that I highly recommend to everybody to watch. There's two-part series on Frontline regarding CTE and football players and the League of Denial. And so not only, again, the football in denial, but again, we being in denial. Again, if you're not in denial and you're choosing this for whatever reason, let's say you want to be a fan and you feel that it's good, then fine. No guilt, no shame, no judgment, no remorse, as we say to every client about everything. None. But at least don't be in denial, and then be clear about what you want.
And don't shame others for not wanting to have their head bashed too. There's a lot of thing. If you complain, then you're sort of a wuss. It's like, I don't want my head bashed.
Well, and don't complain to others, like if they want to watch it, or
right.
It's like there's an argument either way, but it really becomes.
Let's create a conversation about it. Let's talk about it.
Yeah,
well, and I think, too, it becomes like bringing awareness to it, and so that way people, the reality is I don't think the sport of football is probably going anywhere anytime soon, but I think people are going to continue to play, young children are going to continue to get in leagues, and so it's more or less raising awareness of, okay, here are the risks that come along with the sport. What you choose to do with that information is up to you, but I think it's just an awareness piece and having the discussions surrounding it.
Well, I think, it's an interesting thing for the two of you guys. Have you guys had this discussion? I mean, your child is 1.5 years, and what if Ryan says, you know what, I get the risk, but I think it's a wonderful thing, and there's all these advantages. How is you as a mother, Danielle? Would you have a different discussion?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's a really good question, and I think it's hard for me to say right now. It's hard for me to say. I think it would depend on a lot of different factors. I think it would depend on how he just develops over time. And how his cognitive functioning is. And I think, I don't know, it's a hard question to, when you think about it as your own child, because I think it's hard because there's risks with no matter what. Football isn't the only sport. I mean, they've talked about finding this in soccer players and baseball players, and it's like, on the one hand, it's very dangerous and it's out there, but on the other hand, like, you don't want to keep your kids wrapped in bubble wrap for the rest of their life.
And it's fun.
So I don't know. I guess it's a discussion that we'll need to further have as he gets older.
Well, what do you think, Ryan? How would you have this discussion with your wife? Then let's put Danielle in terms of your wife.
Well, my thought is nowadays with the Pop Warner leagues and those kind of leagues that are springing up around Iowa, even, obviously then in the bigger areas, they've been there for a lot longer in the bigger areas, but Iowa started having, at the school I work at, I know there's currently second graders that play flag football, and they start putting on pads at 5th grade now in the at the school at BGM where I work at. So I would think that, and I know in the school district that we live in as well, they start in 5th grade with shoulder pads and helmets and those kind of things. I think that I would not want him to play probably until at least junior high if we do decide on that. Like you said, it's really scary to think about as a parent. What could possibly happen? Is it worth the fame and pride for maybe 4 seasons of high school? Because most likely you're not going to go on to college, and then if you do go on to college and play, you're not going to go on from there to the NFL. Mm-hmm. So the chances of that, that pride and that teamwork, I guess, is that worth potentially fits of rage and aggressive behavior for the next 30-plus years of your life, depending upon how long you make it? That's a really tough. It's a really tough question, like I identified earlier.
Thank you so much. We're out of time for this show today, and we all have so much more to say. We should probably do another one on this. This is great. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Kyle. Everybody, and food for thought. As always, have your own discussion. This isn't about right or wrong. This is about what you crave for your life today. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.